There are so many awesome bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree, ranging from the fairly familiar to wonderfully bizarre in their design. And like me, I'd imagine many of you were left wondering exactly who most of these bosses were, where they came from, and their purpose in the realm of Shadow. So today, we'll be looking at all 11 main legendary bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree to answer as much as we can about the lore and stories of each, with some additional guidance for fighting them too. Feel free to use the timestamps if you're interested in a particular boss, but without further ado, let's dive right in. So let's start off with the first legendary that myself and I imagine many of you will face in Shadow of the Erdtree. In the theatre, towards the upper regions of Ballarat, as we enter for the first time, we'll awaken, seemingly, the divine beast Dancing Lion boss.
O horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered, take root inside the tower's sculpted keepers, and perched within, we beg of thee, rise, dance and kavod, cleanse all the old, cruelty, woe, and those who plague the tower. Cleanse away the strumpet's vile agony.
The voice that we hear for this scene is none other than Hauncent Grandam, an old Hauncent woman residing in a locked storeroom below, which can be opened with a key found on our way through Ballarat. Now, she firmly believes that we are simply another of Messmer's warriors, sent once again to lay waste to the ruins and destroy anything left. In fact, if we meet before fighting the beast, she'll question just why we, a supposed Messmer ally, are still attempting to lay waste to her homeland. She even threatens us with having to face the ire of the divine beast, and thus, when we enter the theatre, she calls upon it to defend Ballarat once again. But this isn't in fact the original purpose of the Dancing Lion, nor in fact is it specifically a lion we're fighting, but more so the channeled spirit of a lion-like divine beast. Notice how she asks it to take root inside the tower's sculpted keepers? Well, that's because under the garments of this creature are actually the bodies of divine beast warriors, of whom, quote, only those who truly excel at divine invocation become sculpted keepers, and are granted the honor of the lion dance, end quote. That's something we learn from the divine beast warrior armor, looted later on from these guys at Ener Ilim. Indeed, the feet and the bodies of this divine beast are made up of two sculpted keepers, fully leaning into this creature's real-life inspiration of Chinese lion dancing. However, the spirit of this creature is still very much present, serving as a horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered. The Hauncent people originally seem to have been a very spiritual culture, and this lion dance ritual was originally an homage to both the heavens and fury of nature. But, as we can learn from the remembrance, when Messmer's army assailed the tower, the lion dance ritual was instead used as a means of defense. And now, when Hauncent Grandam bids it to cleanse away the Strumpet's vile progeny, she refers once again to Messmer. The Strumpet, of course, being Marika, who was behind Messmer's assault on the Hauncent, and her progeny, her offspring, being Messmer himself, who's another boss that we'll come to in a later chapter. But what I find most interesting about the Dancing Lion, though, is that it both is, and kind of isn't, this divine lion-esque creature. And the headpiece, which we can loot after the fight, explains this almost slightly grafted entity is brought to life by Hauncent Grandam's prayer. A prayer to an entity who clearly has some divine power over the elements, as the lion can call upon storms, frosts, lightning, and more. What isn't clear though, is exactly where the beast heads come from. Whether a lion-esque creature is sent from a higher plane to be decapitated and fashioned into ritual headwear, or whether the Hauncent simply fashion this head themselves from unliving material. I say this because in the cutscene where the lion stands up, the sculpted keeper slams its lower jaw into place in an almost mechanical kind of way. And if these divine beasts, whatever their actual body looks like, are so revered and respected, I struggle to see the Hauncent first killing them, even if it's to channel their furious spirits later. And make no mistake, this boss is furiously aggressive, diving, spinning, and spitting elemental attacks with little chance to recover. Luckily, we can summon Freya for this fight, and she can take a lot of that aggro. If you want to just solo it, then maybe go stock up on Scadutree fragments first, and if you want an even greater challenge, then there's actually a second dancing lion over in the Ruins of Rao, with the additional attack of Deathblight Breath. I covered that in more detail in this previous video of bosses you don't want to miss, but knowing what we know now about the puppet nature of the dancing beast, it makes this one's Deathblight abilities even more curious. I theorized before that it had something to do with the heads of Godwyn buried in the catacombs below, whose disensouled body naturally spreads a form of death. So perhaps the Hornsent's outer god of the elements is utilizing Godwyn's Deathblight to its own ends. But if you want more info on all of that, then do go check out the previous video, specifically the chapters on Death Knights and this dancing lion. As to the one back in Ballarat, defeating it and wearing its head for ourselves, then speaking to Hornsent Grandam will allow her questline to advance, truly convincing her that we ourselves are in fact a sculpted keeper, and you'll want to do that before defeating Messmer, as she too will request that you exact vengeance in the name of her people. So to sum up, the Divine Beast Dancing Lion is a puppet comprised of devout Hornsent warriors and puppeted through prayer by an elemental being of divinity, probably an outer god of the elements. Next up is one of my favourite boss fights in terms of combat, and in fact soundtrack. Rellana, Twin Moon Knight, can be found at the end of Castle Ensis, a princess of Carian descent, and not to be mistaken for her twin sister Rellana, whom we of course fight and eventually use for respecking back in the base game. Rellana also had 3 children with Radahn, Marika's other half, and they were Radahn, Rykard, and Luna Princess Rani, so Rellana would also be aunt to them. But unlike her twin sister, who would eventually become Carian Queen, Rellana, according to her remembrance, disavowed her birthright and chose to stand at Messmer's side instead, knowing full well that not even the brilliance of the moon could grant him succor. Before long, she became known as the Sword of Messmer. So, whilst her sister Rellana courted the literal other half of Marika, Radahn, Rellana similarly pledged her allegiance, in a way, to Marika, though from that description, it sounds almost as though Rellana was unrequitedly infatuated with Messmer, giving up everything despite knowing that he would never love her back. And by love, I don't necessarily mean in the romantic sense, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that, but perhaps more a total devotion to Messmer's cause, which we'll cover in his chapter. From this remembrance, we can get 2 more items. Firstly, Rellana's twin blades, which appear to represent this union between Caria and Messmer's crusade, with one serving as a shining glintstone piece, whilst the other burns alight with Messmer's flame. Perhaps the closest thing to union between the two that Rellana could ever achieve. The twin moon sorcery, though, appears to be more connected with her sister Rellana. After all, from Rellana herself, we can gain a very similar sorcery of just a singular moon. In fact, the same goes for Rellana's singular sword. It feels almost like Rellana just wants to one-up her sister, in a sense. And whilst Rellana's moon is described as an entity she encountered when younger, Rellana's twin moons are described in much the same way, explaining that Rellana and Rellana discovered together a set of twin moons which at the time were overlapping, as though nestled against one another. And when Rellana went to the Shadow Realm and Rellana stayed in Liurnia, I guess each world ended up with 1 moon each, explaining the skies when we go there. And Rellana didn't head into the Shadow Realm alone either. With her, she brought an elite guard of Carian mages and her chamberlain, Moonrathil, who was also, according to her sword, a friend to the trolls who served the royal family, and she proudly wielded their weapons as she fought arm in arm with her gargantuan comrades. Moonrathil's involvement in this offshoot of Carian royalty, in fact, probably explains the spectral troll guarding the Rao Waygate just outside Castle Ensis, who's worth defeating, by the way, for a nice bounty of smithing stones. These followers of Rellana were said to have left their homeland with an unparalleled devotion, and according to the Rellana's cameo talisman, said, "By your leave, we will accompany you wherever your lunar vessel takes you." Now, when it says lunar vessel, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what that could be. As far as I can tell, the moons of Elden Ring aren't simply large spatial bodies, but rather entities, outer gods in their own right. Lunar Princess Rani, Rellana's niece back in the base game, may call upon the wisdom of the moon to usher in her age of stars, where the land between is left more to fend for itself, but is no longer subjugated by the greater will. Could the moon Rellana met have been another such outer god? And could it have served as her lunar vessel, guiding her through life? I think certainly lunar magic does originate from outer moon gods that Rennala and Rellana met in their youth, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on these lunar aspects of the lore. So, with her elite guard, it appears as though Rellana has been eternally tasked with guarding Castle Ensis, serving as a midway defense between the Hornsent city of Ballarat and Messmer's Shadowkeep. And if we want to defeat this speedy, twin-blade, glintstone-wielding boss, then again, summoning Leda for the fight can offset a lot of Rellana's aggro from us. Whilst very nimble, Rellana does not often leap from foe to foe across the arena in less than a second, like other bosses. But otherwise, I found a bleed build helped to drain her health pretty quick, and not being overly greedy with attacks, unless you can break her stance. Watch out for the big moon slam towards the end of the fight too, which requires some well-timed jumping, and good luck in defeating this Karian warrior, Lunar Princess. Messmer may seem like a major villain of the DLC, and he is, though he has a lot more nuance than that, as we'll see. He's one of the only bosses we need to defeat to progress the expansion, and he is by no means easy.
Strength of the grace of gold shall all be dead in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
This quote, I'm sure we're all overly familiar with, and it more or less sums up the motivation behind Messmer's crusade. You see, at one point in time, Marika and her Golden Order sought to eradicate the Hornsent people, and it appears she told Messmer that this was a cleansing action, removing those that aren't part of the Greater Will's plan so that all may come under the reign of the Golden Order. And as we've established, the ancient Hornsent culture worship another outer god, one tied in with the elements and divine beasts. They are untouched by the grace of gold, and thus must meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame. Messmer, Marika's son, sent to lead this violent crusade to burn away all opposition for the glory of the Golden Order. Or at least that's what Messmer thinks. In actuality, Marika's motives are far more fueled by vengeance, and in the hinterland region behind the Shadowkeep, only accessible after performing the "Oh Mother" gesture, guarded by 2 Erdtree sentinels, we can come to the Shaman village. A completely empty settlement, but more awash with life than anywhere else in the Shadow Realm. Here, we can find a minor Erdtree, which Marika used to bathe her village in gold, knowing full well that there was nobody left to heal. She also gifted to somebody called the Grandmother 1 golden braid of her hair, an offering, it would seem, in return for a prayer, or a wish, or a confession. Perhaps, at least it's my theory, that it's most likely the latter. You see, the shamans of the Shaman village didn't just up and vanish from here. They were taken by the Hornsent to the Bonnie village, where, through a grotesque ritual, the flesh of multiple people would be pulped and congealed into one repulsive entity, then stuffed into living jars. And it's said that the flesh of shamans especially was most attractive to the Hornsent, as it melded harmoniously with others. As to why the Hornsent conducted this ritual at all, well, they seem to believe that this is the means by which shamans would achieve sainthood, and the fact that most of these jars can be found in the underground jails of the Shadow Realm perhaps suggests that the flesh melded to the shamans was that of criminals. Perhaps the Hornsent sought to purify sin by combining sinners with the seemingly innocent shamans. Though that's just my speculation. Whatever their motives, it's clear that Marika later sought revenge in the name of her village. The fate suffered by her people was, after all, disgusting, and stirred her ire tremendously, bringing us back to her son, Messmer, Now, we don't know Messmer's full parentage, not for certain, but it seems he was born before the likes of Godwyn, Morgott, and Mohg, Marika and Godfrey's children, perhaps even being born into the shaman village itself. But of all his siblings and half-siblings, he seems most alike to Malenia and Miquella, who both are also cursed, leading me to speculate that those two are not the first children born of a union between Marika and Radahn, two halves of the same person, and that in fact the two had conceived this secret child together before splitting off to marry Godfrey and Rellana respectively. The story trailer shows Marika ascending to godhood at the Gate of Divinity, having plucked a golden braid from something or someone.
The seduction and the betrayal. An affair from which gold arose. And so too was Shadow born.
I think perhaps the affair could be speaking of Marika's later marriage to Godfrey, which ultimately resulted in the founding of the Golden Order. This would have ended the first secret union between Marika and Radahn, which, according to this theory, would have produced both Messmer and Melina. Indeed, the item Messmer's kindling says, quote, "Messmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire." End quote. And whilst both Malenia and Rani could also qualify as Messmer's younger sisters, it is of course Melina who's destined to serve as the kindling that will light the Erdtree aflame. And whilst I'd love to dive into this Melina theory more here, given the number of bosses to cover in this video, let's try and stick with Messmer, moving on to his curse. You see, as we learn when we meet him, a malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, a being known as the Base Serpent, which Marika locked away by placing into Messmer's eye socket a seal of grace. And it's also said in his remembrance that this is the reason Messmer was banished, or sent to the Shadow Realm, keeping company with the original sin and a hatred that would not be confined. Now, I'm not certain yet what the original sin is referring to, but if this is a contained reference to Marika's founding of the Golden Order, I would assume, once again, that it's the Hornsent's act of forcing shamans into jars. Those events, and Marika's vengeful war that followed, are all things she'd rather seal off from the land between, all of it too corrupted to ever be purified into the Golden Order. Now, Messmer's flame is also described as a dark thing, eaten away at by a wicked serpent, and it's capable of burning the sealing tree, which it appears was a device used by the Hornsent to conceal Ene Ilim from Messmer's forces. Now, according to the Messmer's Orb incantation, he despised his own fire. Time and time again, he hoped to rid himself of it, but ever did it burn. And this presents two theories. Either A, Messmer hates the accursed base serpent inhabiting his flesh and the flame that comes from within it, or B, that once, in an attempt to rid himself of the flame that he may have been born with, he invited the base serpent to consume it, hoping that it would cleanse himself of the flame for good, only for the base serpent to also become a part of him, cursing the poor demigod twice over, resulting in the placement of Marika's seal and his imprisonment in the Shadow Realm. The Fire Serpent incantation is described to launch a serpentine flame that bends and curls in pursuit of its foe, taught to the Fire Knights as a substitute, after Messmer's own flame would not find purchase within them. So, Messmer, despite hating his own flame, also, it seems, attempted to imbue his Fire Knights with it. This was presumably done in an attempt to further deliver Marika's vision, as when she did seek vengeance against the Hornsent, Messmer made himself a symbol of fear, undertaking the cleansing crusade she desired. Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone. Messmer was so loyal to his mother that he sought to take complete blame for the atrocities inflicted in his burning crusade. And make no mistake, much as we've looked at things from Messmer's perspective so far, what he did to the Hornsent was atrocious. Sure, some of them started it by putting shamans into jars, but the name Messmer the Impaler only begins to describe Messmer's actions in his campaign, during which stacks upon stacks of bodies were piled high and impaled gold on spikes. The fire giant golems, additionally, were created specifically as these huge furnaces into which countless victims would be thrown, and even the majority of divine beasts were gored and hung upon Messmer's spears, then burned in his flame. Creatures born of the primordial crucible, whose only crime was to be untouched by the grace of gold. And remember, Messmer very likely didn't know that Marika was doing any of this to get revenge for the shaman village. He was willing to slaughter the Hornsent people simply because horned omens were seen as a vile affront to the Golden Order, or at least that's what Hornsent believes, whom we can summon in the Messmer fight as an ally, and who understandably is desperate for revenge.
My clan's suffering, their pain, all that they felt. Do you understand now? Your ugliness.
Going back to the base serpent though, and it seems Marika's seal wasn't the only thing keeping this creature locked away, and the additional winged serpent would become a token creature of Messmer's military forces, a wise friend keeping the base serpent at bay and holding its power in check. According to the helm dropped by Cood, captain of the Fire Knights, just outside Messmer's own arena. But Messmer's own helm also expands on the winged serpents a little more, describing them as constant companions which have been with Messmer from when the base serpent was sealed behind his eye, accompanying him through his eternity of suffering and continuing to accompany him even after destroying Marika's grace, keeping the base serpent at bay. In fact, let's look a bit more at just why Messmer does this during the fight with us, which happens at pretty much the midway point of his health, where, begging for Marika's forgiveness, he opts to pluck out her seal and let loose the base serpent, as he believes that now to be the only way to defeat us. For the entire fight, in fact, from the moment we enter the room, Messmer struggles to fathom just why his mother, Marika, would sanction for us to become Elden Lords. After all, we are tarnished, and thus stripped of the grace of gold and banished from the lands between, becoming part of the very thing Messmer swore to destroy. And so, true to his purpose, he would rather unleash the monster within him than concede defeat to us. But after another 50 tries, once you finally learn the timings of these giant writhing snakeheads, that doesn't work for Messmer either. And finally, faced with his defeat, Messmer, for the first time seemingly ever, falters in his loyalty to his mother.
Marika, a curse upon thee.
And it's no small faltering either. It's not, "Oh mother, why hast thou abandoned me?" It's a full 180, a realization that this tarnished has been granted by Marika enough grace not just to defeat him, but the base serpent too. And ultimately, the suffering Messmer endured here at Marika's behest, all the slaughtering and impaling he did, only ultimately led to his abandonment and death. We don't know exactly how long Messmer held out here loyal to Marika, not specifically, but we do know that it was a very, very long time, during which Messmer not only stood as victor over the defeated Hornsent, but also faced rebellion from in amongst his own ranks. The Black Knight commander Andreas and his son Captain Hugh are both ashes, which could be found in the Fog Rift and Scorpion River catacombs respectively. These guys too, like Rellana, abandoned the grace of the Erdtree to follow in Messmer's crusade, but when learning of his true serpentine nature, attempted to rebel, leading to their imprisonment in underground tombs, and Messmer mourning the loss of his brothers in arms. And whilst plenty of Black Knights still remained loyal to him, by the end, it's really the Fire Knights who were truly Messmer's most loyal. And whilst it seems they couldn't be granted the power of Messmer's flame directly, there are plenty who ran fire magic experiments of their own. Salsa the Sage, for one, an elite knight guarding the passage to the ruins of Rao, will drop a Rain of Fire incantation and a swollen hood. He's described as having a disdain for barbarism, even though his supreme skill with fire led to him burning more villages than any other. It may even be he who burnt down the Church of the Bud, which we'll come to later. Though eventually it seems that Salsa did make a stand, refusing to burn down one old ruin at risk of his own life. His elder, Wago, can also be defeated down in the Church District, and he is caught in the midst of a much more sinister experiment involving Messmer's flame. Commanding to some corpses, fire takes seed in them, in an attempt at resurrection. This is further recounted on the Death Mask helm we can loot after defeating him, and describes the flame-ridden bodies he brought to life as utterly soulless. Though, what this does tell us is that Messmer's flame can be used, albeit fleetingly, to animate the dead. Though the second they reach us, they will immediately explode, which I guess hammers home the idea that Messmer's flame is purely meant for destructive means. The last Fire Knight we're going to talk about is that of Hilda, an ashes found at the very top of this huge library in the Shadowkeep, which is kind of awkward to get to and involves timing to counterweight elevators, but finally obtaining the ashes, it reads, quote, "Hilda was a dear friend to Salsa the Sage, and joined those who urged that the specimens be preserved. Hilda's ashes were enshrined as a charm to protect the storehouse." End quote. So, much like Salsa, this Fire Knight didn't want to burn the remnants of the Hornsent Society completely, and it seems was a major voice in commissioning the construction of this ginormous library, which, as it turns out, is housing the knowledge of the entire Hornsent culture. It explains the existence of the Secret Rite Scroll, for instance, which provides insight into how one would use the Divine Gateway at the concealed Enir Ilim to become a god. And I think overall, in agreeing to preserve the knowledge of the Hornsent culture, Messmer at least displays a decent amount of wisdom, if not straight up compassion. He's doing his job at the behest of his mother still, of course, though she only said to kill all those devoid of grace, not to destroy every memory and reference of their culture. So, overall, whilst Messmer may at first appear to straight up be a villain, I would also say he's partly a victim to the abandonment of his mother. We've talked a lot about Messmer just now, but given how prominent he is in the story, I'm certain there'll be more details I've missed. So please comment below your thoughts, theories, and additional info. But with that, it's on to the next legendary boss, which just so happens to be Messmer's best friend, Commander Gaius, found just north of the Shadowkeep in the Shadowview region via the secret elevator at the back of the storehouse. And when first entering this region, it's clear that Gaius is guarding the passageway up to the Scadutree Chalice and will charge towards us with insane speed as we become trapped inside the arena. And you can see me panickingly realizing that a fog wall has actually just come down here, and now there's no escape. Gaius is a very tough fight, or at least he was for my build, and is kind of like a more difficult charging tree sentinel, though we can cheese him a bit by immediately going behind this corner to bring in our summons, so I hope that's useful. You'll notice through the fight that Gaius heavily resorts to gravity magic, much like Radahn, and when finally defeating him, we can uncover plenty of lore to explain this, starting with Gaius's remembrance, reading, quote, "Both were as elder brothers to the lion, and were cursed from birth. In spite of, or perhaps because of this very reason, Gaius was both Messmer's friend and the leader of his men." End quote. And presumably that's meaning military commander of Messmer's entire army, seeing as his Black Knights, Fire Knights, and the rest each have their own appointed individual leader within their own groups. The lion referred to here is no doubt talking about Radahn, and indeed, Gaius's armor confirms that both he and Radahn were taught their gravitational techniques by the same Alabaster Lord, presumably around a similar time, as the Blades of Stone sorcery describes Gaius and Radahn as good rivals in their use, the sorcery a product of their friendly competition. This also, however, confirms that Messmer once served as an elder brother to Radahn. Literally, of course, he was his half-brother, but it seems as though he also had a hand in raising what would one day grow up to be arguably the most powerful, but also kindly lord. It once again lends credence to the idea that Messmer isn't out-and-out evil, but also suggests that he spent some time in the Lands Between, presumably before the Lands Between and Shadow Realm were separated. And since we know that Miquella knew the younger Radahn too, perhaps it's no stretch to assume that Messmer and Miquella also knew one another. But we're getting off topic here. Back to Gaius, and the Remembrance also mentions his curse. Now, how is Gaius cursed exactly? Well, after defeating him, head into the region beyond, and before looting your 5 Scadutree fragments from the chalice, head directly west to the Albinauric Shack. Defeat the Wolf Rider and loot Gaius's greaves, something Gaius himself could never wear, as he was in fact an Albinauric. People made by human hands from the Primordial Dew, or Silver Tears, who, since they aren't given life by the Erdtree, are thus considered untouched by its grace. Additionally, they are all cursed to lose the use of their legs, and eventually their lives. Thus, any warrior Albinaurics are forced to ride into battle atop mounts. Most, including Gaius's female companion, ride with white wolves, but for Gaius, it was a massive, very difficult to dodge boar, whom it said he was never without. After all, how could he stride into battle at a moment's notice, if not always atop this magnificent beast? But why then is Gaius stationed down here, out the back of the keep? Why isn't he guarding the front entrance, or just up there keeping Messmer company? The two, after all, were friends. And, well, you see, there's something that doesn't quite add up here. Gaius's Albinauric extraction makes him graceless, and as we've heard Messmer say a million times now,
those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death.
Gaius and Messmer should be enemies. But it appears thanks to the bond in their youth, which presumably was before Marika's crusade, Messmer could or would not kill Gaius. And we've seen how devoted this guy is to his mother, the lengths he'll go to carry out her will, even shouldering all the blame afterwards for himself. And so, I think perhaps Gaius placed himself up here, in an entirely separated region well below the Shadow Keep, and sealed off too from the hinterland, Marika's empty home, which is instead guarded by tree sentinels. Perhaps the reason Gaius attacks us when we enter here is that he thinks we're an agent of Messmer, finally sent to finish his job. And also, who is the Albinauric companion located just beyond? I mean, you'd think Gaius might get a free pass from Messmer, but her? Perhaps she's his second-in-command, or maybe even his lover. The sharp-shot talisman found in her shack at least indicates that she was an elite archer. And who else is Gaius going to guard this gate for, if not the one that he loves? Alternatively, Gaius may just be trapped here, imprisoned by Messmer as a compromise to not killing him, but never able to leave. After all, somebody had Gaius's greaves fashioned as a cruel joke. And again, perhaps that was Messmer, kitting out his Albinauric commander to spend his days in the Shadowview region. Then again, this whole theory would need to suggest that Gaius was only leader of Messmer's men before this crusade in the Shadow Realm, before Marika bade Messmer kill all those without grace for the glory of the Golden Order. And perhaps instead, Gaius simply was Messmer's commander, even through this crusade. And for whatever reason, an exception was made for Albinaurics. It's just difficult to see that being the case when they were so heavily persecuted by the Golden Order back in the Lands Between. Something else we mustn't overlook though is the Scadutree Chalice, found here at the base of this huge structure at the northernmost point of the Shadow Realm, with the largest collection of 5 Scadutree fragments all in one place, as well as a collection of skeletons containing blessed bone shards, the remains of warriors touched by the Scadutree and said to be the greatest honor that can be granted to the dead. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to what exactly the purpose of this chalice is, and if you ask me, I think it's a means of honoring the dead in the Shadow Realm, the place that all death ultimately drifts. After all, a chalice is like a holy goblet, and when we enter the Shadow Realm for the first time, we see, from a perfect angle, the Scadutree pouring its sap right into this huge structure, which itself has a curved chalice-like shape too. It appears this entire thing is incredibly sacred to the people of the Shadow Realm, and whilst I still take issue with Gaius and Albinauric escaping Messmer's flame, perhaps he simply has been tasked with guarding such a holy site used to bless the remains of the dead. Though this is all getting way into Scadutree territory, bringing us on to the next boss. Nestled between Shadowview and the hinterland, albeit located deep below, through a secret passage in the drained church district, we can come through a tunnel across a wooden bridge and into the Tree Worship Sanctum, a place that clearly followers of Marika used to congregate at, implying that the Scadutree too was worshipped once upon a time. But now, guarding the fetid, almost oily landscape beyond the sanctum is this Sunflower Guardian, the Scadutree Avatar. A boss that I really started off enjoying, but by the end I was getting very fed up of dying in round 3. It fulfills the same role as Erdtree avatars of course, but in terms of design differs wildly. And to understand its purpose here, I think we have to briefly look back to the Erdtree avatars. Much more stump-like in appearance and numerous around the land between, it said in the Staff of the Avatar description that these avatars only emerged in the wake of the Elden Ring's shattering, determined to serve as protectors for the withering Erdtree's offspring. So they're not really there for the sake of the Erdtree at all, but rather the minor, more vulnerable Erdtrees. Yet, the Scadutree Avatar specifically inhabits the base of the Scadutree, presumably guarding these once sacred grounds, and takes on the wildly different form of a sunflower head attached to impenetrable thorns. The remembrance of the sunflower begins to shine light on this. Reading, quote, "The Scadutree is the shadow of the Erdtree, born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle." End quote. So, whilst the Erdtree is a holy beacon of the land between, a uniform golden structure representing the grace of the Golden Order, the Scadutree represents exactly what this realm is: disordered, twisted, and mostly devoid of grace. A land steeped in so much war that Marika sealed it off to serve as a shadow of the land between, before ultimately abandoning it, and all those within. The Scadutree fragments themselves describe the tree as crumbling from its core, scattering itself across the Shadow Realm for the pieces to be collected and used in prayer, sending out splinters as opposed to the Erdtree's golden seeds. The impenetrable thorn sorcery found in the Shadowkeep storehouse literally allows us to replicate a signature move of the Scadutree Avatar. Therefore, I believe its description speaks something to this sunflower's motivation. Quote, "Sorcery of those who abandoned the practice of incantations after devout faith rewarded them with only despair. The image of the twisted Scadutree is an edict. Denounce their ways, do them harm, for they have abandoned us." End quote. Clearly, there's a great deal of bitterness from those who worship the Scadutree, feeling utterly abandoned by the Golden Order and wanting revenge for such maltreatment. Going back again to Messmer for a second, he, in his final moments, denounces and curses Marika, upon finally realizing this whole time that he too has been abandoned. Though I expect many of his followers would have realized this a long time before. And notice around the church district, even in the very tree worship sanctum, the statues of Marika have all been beheaded, no doubt by those bitterly fulfilling the edict of the Scadutree. There's also an ulcerated tree spirit in the church district once we drain it, which seems to emerge from this similar shadow-like tree, and this one will drop the Mantle of Thorns, reading almost identically, only with the edict saying, quote, "Spurn all that exists, wound all that exists, for we have been abandoned." End quote. Okay, so it's saying basically the same thing, but this time it's much more extreme. The bitterness is directed outwards at anything and everything, and I may be stretching here, but the edict is seemingly becoming more extreme as we draw closer to the Scadutree Avatar. From trading its remembrance at the Finger Reader, we can obtain two more things. The first is the Shadow Sunflower Blossom, the head of the creature to be wielded as a weapon. This description draws particular attention to how a second stalk winds tightly around the first, likening it to a tender embrace. And indeed, the Scadutree is one of the many parts of the Elden Ring universe, it seems, that represents a duality, the same as Marika and Radahn, Godfrey and Hoarah Loux, Ranni and Godwyn, and, as we'll look at later, Radahn and Miquella. This duality of the Scadutree is also present in the Avatar's Land of Shadow incantation, channeling the Scadutree's power. Its gold is accompanied by shadow, unlike the Erdtree, which is purely gold. Yet, as we can see, the Scadutree isn't entirely just a shadow of the Erdtree. After all, it leaks its own golden sap, which is more than can be said for the Erdtree, and this sap is clearly sacred enough for people to build a ginormous ritualistic chalice structure in order to collect it and bless their fallen warriors. These blessed bone fragments can be used to craft some warmth stones, and again, these stones are more powerful versions of basic warming stones, crafted from Erdtree material. I think it's clear at this point that this sap falling from the Scadutree is actually more holy and more powerful than anything we can find in the lands between. Now, the primordial crucible is said to be where all life originated, and I believe the dew from the Scadutree is a direct connection to that crucible. On the aspect of the crucible thorns incantation dropped by the golden hippopotamus, we can learn that before the Shadow Realm became enshrouded in shadow, the vitality of the crucible flourished, manifesting itself in the divine beasts that inhabited this land. Similarly, the Blessed Dew Talisman explains that once the Erdtree dripped with this same sap, but eventually ran dry, making the tree more an object of faith nowadays. And the Scadutree, with its sap dripping still, glows with far more power than the Erdtree. In the Ruins of Rao, we can also defeat an enemy called Devonia, oldest of the Crucible Knights, who left the lands between in search of the Crucible's origin, drawn here, no doubt as well, by the still flowing sap of the Scadutree. Back in the Avatar's arena, we can also harvest shadow sunflowers, another reflection of the golden sunflowers around the Erdtree, with these ones being uniquely covered in impenetrable thorns and suffused with profound holiness, much akin to the Scadutree itself. Now, that's a very interesting description, and suggests these sunflowers also to be more holy than those growing around the Erdtree, perhaps implying that the disorder of nature is still more powerful than the regimented Golden Order, or perhaps any of the other orders to have come before it. The Scadutree may now be brittled and shattered by what's happened to this realm, but it wasn't always. And with the sanctum found down here, it's clear that even Marika's followers also worshipped the Scadutree long ago, perhaps before her betrayal of the Hornsent and her crusade. So coming back to the Avatar itself, its chaotic, contorted, thorny design represents more the chaos of nature, and also perhaps manifests the bitterness felt by many who've been abandoned in this realm towards the Erdtree. The other curious item that the Scadutree Avatar drops though, the main reason you want to power through the 3 stages and defeat it in fact, is the remains of Miquella's Great Rune, said to be relinquished by Miquella. Broken and bereft of its bounty, it retained naught but the power to resist charms. Miquella set off for the tower enshrouded by shadow, abandoning everything, his golden flesh, his blinding strength, even his fate, all in an effort to bury the original sin, to embrace the whole of it, and be reborn as a new god. We'd best come back to a lot of that in the final chapter of this video, covering Radahn and Miquella. Now, functionally, this rune is very useful in that final boss fight for dispelling Miquella's heart-stealing charm. But the main thing I'm left wondering is just why Miquella divested the remains of his Great Rune to the Scadutree Avatar specifically. And whilst that isn't 100% clear, what is more clear is when. As you approach the Shadowkeep for the first time, you'll hear a shattering sound ring out. Somewhere, a great rune has broken, and so too has a powerful charm. This rune is destroyed literally as we're in the Shadow Realm, suggesting that Miquella may even have been down here alongside the Scadutree Avatar very recently before us, presumably as part of his quest to Enir Ilim, shedding off every part of himself. The Great Rune too then was something that had to go. But why bring it to the Scadutree Avatar? Does this thing have a specific ability to destroy great runes with its deeper connection to the Crucible? Or is there perhaps a more ritualistic sense to it? Does the Avatar destroying a great rune of the Erdtree succeed in burying the Erdtree's original sin perhaps, handing it over to something older, more chaotic, and much more powerful? Whatever the case, it appears the Scadutree, and by extension its Avatar, played a vital role in Miquella's ascension to godhood, something, again, we'll come back to. A few tips for fighting this very fascinating boss though: make sure at the end of each stage to come around and land a crit on the flowerhead to immediately knock off 25% of its health for the next round. Also, staying close to this one can actually avoid most of its attacks, save for these ground spikes, annoyingly, and in round 3, when it starts doing this, I highly recommend you run. Good luck if you haven't completed it already. It's a fun fight, and one of the best pieces of prep for the last, notoriously difficult boss. Romina, Saint of the Bud, is the next compulsory boss whom we'll have to defeat at the Ruins of Rao in order to burn the sealing tree with Messmer's flame. Very unique in design, Romina is clearly affiliated heavily with Scarlet Rot, though unlike Malenia, who originally resisted her internal rot, Romina didn't, and appeared much more eager to embrace it. And it's said, in Romina's remembrance, after the church was burned to the ground, Romina discovered a twisted divine element, which she weaved into the baleful Scarlet Rot. Perhaps then, the buds might find somewhere to gain purchase once more, within the scorched remains. End quote. Now, this event we can actually see taking place in the story trailer. Amidst the fire and carnage of Messmer's crusade, kneeling amidst burning ruins is Romina, before her transformation, holding in speechless silence a bud. That bud would become her blade. And the rotten butterflies, an incantation we can obtain alongside the pole blade of the bud, are described as alike to the goddess of Rot's wings. Bereft of a master, they were soothed by Romina, who reached out to them. So effectively, after her church was burned and Romina knelt in speechless silence, she discovered a twisted divine element. This set in motion her transformation from human into an amalgam of centipede, scorpion type centaur thing. And the description may appear to imply that Romina, through partnership with an outer god, created the Scarlet Rot. And whilst I think that's partially true, I think it only applies to the Scarlet Rot found at the Ruins of Rao, this stuff of a more pinkish hue. Back in the base game, the Blue Dancer charm describes how Malenia, under tutelage of a blue dancing fairy, sealed away an ancient god. A god that was Rot itself. So it appears the Rot god is a being well beyond just Romina's church, and it's stated on the Lake of Rot map fragment that this is a place wherein the divine essence of an outer god is sealed away. So no, I don't think Romina created Scarlet Rot as a concept entirely. I mean, if she had, then you'd expect her to be a tougher opponent. But it appears she did resort to using an element of the Rot God's power to rebuild the Church of the Bud, after it was destroyed by Messmer. The Pest Thread Spears, found behind the stairs towards the temple, speak of the kindred of Rot pests, who, back in the lands between, serve as the forsaken, abandoned servants of the Rot goddess. Yet, in the Saint of the Bud, who did choose to take them in, they found, finally, a mother. It's the same deal as the rotten butterflies. All were rejected by Malenia, who refused to come into her true godhood, but no doubt, in attempting to rebuild the Church of the Bud's power, Romina saw these abandoned creatures as valuable allies, who desired only to fulfill their purpose as servants to the Scarlet Rot. Similarly, the terrifying giant spider scorpions, a native being to the realm of shadow, are described in their ashes only to have grown to this extreme size under the meddling of the Church of the Bud. Another means for Romina to bolster her defenses and protect the Church of the Bud from ever being assailed again. Well, until we come along. And perhaps also, the scorpion tail Romina took on came as a result of her meddling with spider scorpions. Overall, Romina shares many similarities with Malenia, representing the type of being Malenia may have morphed into had she embraced her role as goddess sooner. But whilst Romina would achieve sainthood by giving in to the Scarlet Rot's decay, she was not an Empyrean, and thus never was destined to become a Rot goddess. But the Church of the Buds were forever changed into Scarlet Buds that will now never again come into bloom. realm. Another thing that the Church of the Bud also had the task of was defending the Sealing Tree, located on a platform behind the church, adorned with yet more Bud statues. A tree very similar in design to the Scadutree itself, and projecting a giant thorny illusion that obscures the city of Ilim in shadow. Now, I would guess from the fact that Messmer's forces marched through the church before, and the Sealing Tree wasn't burned, that doing so may never have been part of Messmer's plan, and perhaps Ilim was supposed to remain obscured by shadow, hiding the Gate of Divinity. Then again, we also know that the Fire Mage Salter did refuse to burn one of the ancient ruins, and perhaps that was the Sealing Tree. Or maybe it was simply planted later on, and thereafter guarded by the new Scarlet Rotted Church of the Butt. I don't know, this whole aspect is still something of a mystery, but overall, Romina seems to represent what happens in this world when one chooses to embrace the Scarlet Rot's decay and all the denizens that live amongst the rot. It illustrates that the Scarlet Rot doesn't spell just an all-consuming death, like the Frenzied Flames say, but rather a rebirth into something new. Romina wasn't killed by the Scarlet Rot after all, but reborn into something far more powerful, thereafter brandishing her bud as a weapon to defend her church, and likely the Sealing Tree beyond, from any further invasion. Deep below the Cerulean coast, we can find the Stone Coffin Fissure. Now, these huge stone coffins littered across the Cerulean coast are described to be of unknown origin, seemingly drifting to this place to be watched over by the Keepers of the Spirit Graves. The Rings of Spectral Light Sorcery also describes this place as where all death ultimately drifts. The same message also found at the Tower of Suppression, and the Cerulean coast specifically is not a bad place to wind up at in death, I guess, with its beautiful blue flowers. But in the fissure below ground, even more of these stone coffins seem to coalesce. Though this isn't the only secret housed within the fissure, as buried in the depths even further below is the Garden of Deep Purple, pretty much seen as described and guarded by the malformed Putrescent Knight and its steed, armed with a cleaver of human bones and a seeming ability to mould its form, much like the Silver Tears of Nokron. This is a tough boss, with moves forcing us to dodge not only the knight, but also its separate steed at the same time. Fortunately, if we've spoken to Tiolier and progressed his storyline, he'll be able to lend a small amount of help down here. He'll at least draw some of the boss's aggro, and with the Putrescent Knight defeated, we can begin to decipher just what it was, starting with its remembrance, which reads, quote, "All tainted flesh eventually becomes putrescence, and this clump of it imbibed Saint Trina's nectar, which granted it eternal rest, and so it was that putrescence became her night." End quote. Yes, this is the guardian of Saint Trina, and after defeating it, we can meet her in a small cave just beyond. Now, Saint Trina is the other half of Miquella, and just as Miquella divested every other part of himself across the Lands of Shadow, he too cast away Saint Trina, his love, as is described by the Fissure Cross. And back above on the Cerulean coast, we can see that in order to be able to do this, Miquella first cast aside his doubt and vacillation, allowing him to have no qualms about abandoning Saint Trina. A nearby ghost in this region will also comment on this, saying, "Kindly Miquella, I see you've thrown away something you should not have under any circumstances. How will you salvation offer to those who cannot be saved when you could not even save your other self?" End quote. Indeed, for all Miquella's talk of a 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion, it does seem particularly hypocritical when he has divested himself of love, casting Saint Trina into the very depths where all death will ultimately drift to. And like so many living in the realm of shadow, Saint Trina too became abandoned, as her velvet sword describes. Now, imbibing her nectar and dying multiple times, she'll eventually reveal that she doesn't want Miquella to become a god, that divinity would be his cage, and instead she'd like us to kill him, and I guess by extension, her. I might go into more detail on Saint Trina herself in another video, because we should really get back to the Putrescent Knight. We know that it took on this form by imbibing St. Trina's nectar, but what was it originally? Well, around the rest of the fissure, we can fight several clumps that drop the ingredient congealed putrescence, revealing that this is what remains of the impure lives kept within the stone coffins, oozing out of them to become something not too dissimilar to the silver tears of Nokron. And indeed, the Putrescent Knight's more flowing form is very reminiscent of those molded entities, albeit with some bones thrown in the mix. And the mass and vortex of putrescent sorceries also reveal that, quote, "In an age long past, death was burned by ghost flame. Even the remains of tainted flesh were given equal treatment in death." End quote. So effectively, before the Erdtree, ghost flame was used as a form of cremation, presumably allowing body to separate from soul. But what happens to the remains? Well, according to the Knight's remembrance, all tainted flesh eventually becomes putrescence, and the tainted remains inside all these stone coffins that drifted to the fissure would, it seems, eventually coagulate into this. As we make our way along these coffins, in fact, we can see some measures have been taken to defend against the emerging putrescence, in the form of the same sentry stones that guard the Everjails, and none of the congealed putrescences are living within sight of these guardians. I think given the coagulated properties of the Putrescent Knight, how it seems formed out of droplets of an essence, I think it possible that congealed putrescence could actually be what remains of silver tears. The fissure is very similar in tone to the Eternal City of Nokron, and I think that may be because Nokron is where the stone coffins originally floated in from. And since here, all flesh, even the tainted remains of beings crafted from silver tears like Albanorix, was all burned in ghost flame, I believe this is what gave putrescence its bruise colour. It's at the very least a big contrast to the congealed flesh of the jars, which maintain their fleshy colour, suggesting the formation of congealed putrescence must at least be wildly different to that ritual. And whilst I can't confirm it, its origin as life made of silver tears would fit both with the coloration and it being labelled as tainted flesh. The Albanorix, after all, were reviled as impure for being crafted by human hands. Then again, I think it could also be possible that this is the ghost flame burned flesh of a peoples like the shamans. After all, it's said that they meld together and meld with others exceptionally well. Whatever the case, this would thus make the Putrescent Knight an amalgam of silver tears, or shamans burned in ghost flame, then buried in a stone coffin underground. We can then see how it oozed and dripped into the garden of deep purple below, and after imbibing St. Trina's nectar, took on the form of her protector, the shining knight that she no doubt longed for after having been abandoned by her other half. However, since putrescence can't quite do what silver tears can to the same level of quality, the end result is this curved, contorted entity, which needs to rely on the help of bones to hold its structure together. But it's incredibly deadly all the same, with its own use of ghost flame making this theory even stronger in my eyes too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, as I'm sure there's other ways we could swing the ultimate origin of the Putrescent Knight. Metyr is an old being, the first envoy of the Greater Will sent to the Lands Between seemingly long before the Elden Beast. She is the Great Mother of all the Two Fingers and all Finger Creepers that spread across the lands thereafter. But today, she is located deep below the Manus Meta Cathedral, and to get to her, we'll first have to complete the questline of Ymir, which, in doing so, will clear up a lot of the additional lore. When first meeting Ymir, he'll come across as immediately friendly, giving us the hole-laden necklace and a ruins map, leading to the first finger ruins of Rhea. He incites us to travel there, and in the center ring the hanging bell, implying it is purely to our benefit to go and do this. And I mean, it is to our benefit, we'll see why. So coming to this ruin, we see it's this ginormous structure of sprouting fingers, which centralizes around a large hanging bell. Now, looking down from above on the map, even the ruins themselves are shaped like a fingerprint, or specifically like the head of Metyr. Whilst we'll eventually learn that she inhabits her own plane linked to another grounds, perhaps these then serve as her physical manifestations in the Lands Between. Her breeding grounds, if you will, where fingers are sprung up from these chutes below. Another revelation, after ringing the bell, is that the fingers were instrumental in the planting of the Erdtree. The ancient Crimson Seed talisman here is alike to the one from the Land Between, only this one is also grasped by the two fingers, implying that it was they behind its creation. It's the same case with the Cerulean Seed talisman, found at the second set of ruins further to the north. And note the proximity of this one to the shaman village above, where Marika originated from. It wouldn't be a stretch to assume that Marika came into contact with the two fingers here, thus beginning her relationship to the Greater Will and eventual ascension to godhood. Except it wouldn't necessarily be a relationship to the Greater Will, but rather just to the two fingers. You see, upon returning to Ymir after ringing the first bell, we can straight up ask him about the nature of the world, and what he reveals is eye-opening, to say the least.
I fear that you have borne witness to the whole of it. The conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Erdtree. The follies of men, their bitter suffering. Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start. Marika herself, and the fingers that guided her. And this is what troubles me. No matter our efforts, if the roots are rotten, then we have little recourse.
This is the beginning of Ymir's revelation of the truth, that Marika and the two fingers were never actually operating under the direct guidance of the Greater Will, that the roots upon which her Golden Order was founded are ultimately rotten, and her line, as we see time and again, is tainted by cursed children. He also reveals that this revelation is what led Miquella on his journey.
Ever young Miquella saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness. A tragedy if ever there was one. That he would feel compelled to renounce everything when the blame lay squarely with the mother.
After securing both seed talismans, we can ask Ymir about the nature of the world yet again, and he'll reveal even more this time.
Do you recall what I said? That Marika and the fingers that guided her were unsound from the start. Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right. We all need a mother, do we not? A new mother. A true mother who will not give birth to further malady.
And in saying this, it appears he is directly blaming Metyr, Mother of the Fingers, for having lost contact to the Greater Will for a hell of a long time now. Birthing the two fingers, planting the Erdtree, and likely having a hand in Marika's ascension, all without ever actually receiving any updated guidance from the Greater Will. Now, this does call into question whether the Elden Beast still had a connection to the Greater Will, but at any rate, the fingers, whom have been relied upon for guidance all this time, actually haven't been receiving any. The Staff of the Great Beyond, fashioned from Metyr's tail fingers, tells us that despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come. And with her gazing finger colossal weapon, we can also read that her tiny, wart-like eye gazes vacantly into the beyond. Now, one slightly confusing part of this questline comes when Ymir hands us the third and final map, saying,
"My final gift to you. May you join the glimmering stars above."
Now, many have presumed that in handing us this third map, Ymir is instructing us to go and kill Metyr, who we reach by ringing the bell in the final finger ruins below. Though I'm unsure if this is the full intention. It's clear pretty early on that Ymir himself desires to become the true mother of the fingers. Having slated Metyr as damaged and unhinged, he believes himself capable of doing a better job. His own ambition has clearly grown throughout his life, and where he once instructed Rellana in sorcery, he later abandoned his allegiance to the moon after realizing that it was merely the closest of the celestial bodies, nothing more. And by becoming a Mother of the Fingers himself, Ymir hopes that he will be able to commune with the Greater Will, an outer god and a far more powerful celestial entity, it would seem, than the moon. But does this mean that Ymir wants Metyr dead? Or does ringing the bell merely open the way to her, and by telling us to join the glimmering stars above, Ymir is sacrificing us to get to the original Mother himself? And I think the reason this may be his goal is to gain the means by which Metyr once communicated with the Greater Will. This seems to have been done, you see, with something called a microcosm, an orb that Metyr will summon during the fight between her tail fingers, and which she will eventually flee through after her defeat. Now, microcosm suggests that this is merely a representation of something much larger, a piece of the Greater Will itself, I would guess, or perhaps a window to it. Now, we also know that Ymir had figured out slightly how to summon these things, albeit only briefly, a fleeting simulacra which he fully clung to, but could not sustain. We also know that his own maternal staff was fashioned after tail fingers, with a crystal ball within, once again representing a microcosm, but again, this also received no sign from the Greater Will. And so, I would wager that Ymir sought the actual microcosm wielded by Metyr, and after we force her to flee, we don't kill her, she disappears after the fight through this wormhole thing, that this is the action that wounds Count Ymir most irreparably, leading to the attack from both Yolen and himself, after having fashioned his own birthing fingers, much like Metyr.
Look here, at my fingers. I will be the true mother.
Now, I grant you, there's a couple holes in this theory. For one, it's not clear the nature of access that Ymir had to Metyr's astral plane this whole time, but given he seemingly needs us to ring the bell at each of the other ruins, I would presume that he can't access Metyr either. It's also possible that after killing Metyr, Ymir sees us as a threat, even a competitor. Hence the line,
"And I will be the only mother."
I'd love to hear what you guys think as to why Ymir attacks us, because, I don't know, maybe becoming a Mother of the Fingers has just driven the guy to utter insanity. After all, if we just killed the true, original Mother of Fingers, then what kind of hope does he have? So, to sum up, Metyr was the first agent of the Divine Will to arrive in the Lands Between. She was the progenitor to all Fingers and Finger Creepers, who collectively were instrumental in the establishing of the Erdtree and Marika's Golden Order. Though, for a long time, both before and after that, Metyr has secretly been cut off from the Greater Will, residing in some pocket dimension of the Shadow Realm as yet another abandoned being of this place, still waiting for another message from beyond. One final sorcery, though, that I think may offer a reason why the Greater Will abandoned Metyr is the glintstone nail, which flings a magic nail that crumbles during flight. In the description, Count Ymir boasts that this is mere child's play, an echo of a greater truth. And I may very much be stretching with this theory, but what if stretching is the problem? Perhaps the messages from the Greater Will themselves are now coming from so far away, and if they too crumble during flight, then by the time they reach Metyr, she won't be able to detect them. It would be no less of a sad revelation, but at least would imply that the Greater Will didn't simply choose to stop talking to its envoys in the Lands Between. Okay, so this next one may not technically be a main boss, in that they don't drop a remembrance, but given that Bayle the Dread is the end boss of the entire Jagged Mountains area, and has a huge amount of lore surrounding him, we're still covering this ginormous dragon. Now, we first hear the name Bayle on our approach to the Jagged Peak range, when encountering a wounded man near Pillarpath Cross. Egon is a Drake warrior who previously challenged Bayle the Dread, only to be grievously injured and broken by fear. warrior, now laying with each of his limbs in a bloody ruin, having fled his battle with Bayle. But why was Egon hunting Bayle at all? Well, to answer that question, we'll have to head through the Dragon's Pit, defeat the ancient dragon man looting his awesome katana, then come out to the other side, and head south to the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion, where we meet the Dragon Communion Priestess, formerly a dragon herself, and now serving to guide Drake warriors towards the Jagged Peak to defeat and feast upon the heart of Bayle. For killing this mighty dragon and consuming its vile heart would be the purest form of communion. This of course answers why Egon wanted to defeat Bayle, though also raises more questions, such as why the consumption of dragon hearts became a thing in the first place, and why this former dragon is encouraging such a thing. And to understand that, we'll have to go back to a time before Marika, the Golden Order, and the Elden Ring as we know it. In ages past, the reigning Elden Lord was instead Dragon Lord Placidusax, a mighty four-headed dragon who ruled from the ancient city of Farum Azula in an age before the Erdtree. And according to his remembrance, he too served a nameless god, a god which one day fled, leading to Placidusax awaiting its return in the storm beyond time. We don't know who this god was for certain, but there's a good chance that it could have been one of the outer gods that we do know of, or one that we don't. Either way, when we enter the storm beyond time in Farum Azula, there we will find Placidusax. Only, unlike his talisman depicting four heads, the Dragon King now only has two, with the other two clearly having been torn off in some ancient battle. Now, let's go back for a second and listen to what the Dragon Priestess has to say about Bayle.
In a time long past, Bayle turned upon the Dragon Lord. The foul traitor assailed our master and inflicted a grievous wound, only to make a hasty retreat, becoming a sworn enemy of the group.
Indeed, this grievous wound she speaks of, we can actually see to be the double beheading of Placidusax, and we can confirm this with even more certainty by taking a very close look at Bayle's body and noticing that still attached are two of the long-necked heads of Placidusax. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we should answer exactly why Bayle betrayed his Elden Lord, and to answer that, we'll have to come behind the Fort of Reprimand to the Elder's Hovel, where a ghost can be found looking out on the Jagged Peak, proclaiming, "O Bayle, tyrant Drake, do your wounds yet ache? Is your fury still yet to crest its zenith? Hurry, hurry, and lay it all to waste. Lay waste to the proud, the conceited, every last one of that arrogant lot." Evidently, Bayle had grown tired of the pride and arrogance of the ancient dragons, and clearly despised the ideals upon which Placidusax's order was founded. The contrast is reminiscent, in fact, of the difference between the Hornsent and the Golden Order, and the spirit's accompanying talisman confirms that Bayle's challenge to the Dragon Lord ended in grievous mutual injury. When also asking the Dragon Priestess about Egon, she explains he's driven by a bottomless hunger and fiery ambition, which only flows from those young and short of sight. All qualities which also seem to exist in the dragon Bayle. Clearly, Bayle comes across as a much more brutish dragon governed by rage than the other ancient dragons. And perhaps it was after Placidusax's god left that Bayle grew tired of the Dragon Lord's unguided rule, seeing not why he shouldn't be just as worthy to rule in Placidusax's place. Whatever and whenever the case, it would have been an epic battle, and when Bayle fled after both had suffered grievous wounds, he was forever named enemy to the ancient dragons. Though it appears he wasn't acting entirely alone in his rebellion, and the final dragon we'll face before Bayle on the Jagged Peak is another of the ancients, Senesax, showing that at least one of Placidusax's order chose to side with Bayle. Aside from that, the other dragons we'll face on this mountain are not of the ancient variety, but rather all the lesser dragons of Bayle's bloodline, the Drakes, notably different in anatomy for having just one set of wings and one set of legs, as opposed to the two of each which the ancients had. I guess dragon descendants just don't inherit the lost limbs of their ancestors. Ancient dragons also could channel the power of primeval red lightning, whilst the drakes, again, had no such ability, described by Plusigisac's Cragblade as the paltry, mortal dragons of today. And Dragon Communion, the act of consuming dragons' hearts to gain their powers, was a way for the race of ancient dragons to incite drake warriors to kill the drakes and absorb their power, automatically culling Bayle's brood of lesser dragons. And with the promise of the heart of Bayle himself granting us immense power, it's up the mountain to defeat him. Though on the way, after bearing witness to a fight between two drakes, we'll once again come face to face with Egon, who, still broken in body, remains on the mountain in soul, and begs that once we reach Bayle, we summon him too for aid, leading to my favourite performance in the entire DLC. Come on, we fought him enough times to know all the lines, and every single time he said them, they did not wane in epicness. In fact, the entire Bayle fight as a whole is visually epic, with both incredible and terrifying moments, both. Definitely my favourite dragon fight in Elden Ring, but with Bayle defeated, Egon finally gains peace, and sadly, on our descent back down the mountain, we find that his body has given its last. His great bow confirming that his feud with Bayle was more akin to an obsession. But now, we can take Bayle's heart to the altar of Dragon Communion, and consuming it will unlock one of two draconic powers, though both of them come with a warning, that even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bayle continues to resist subjugation, never weakening, and that one day, the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its Communion devourer. One day. This seems to imply that should we consume Bayle's heart, the Dread Dragon will one day be reborn from within us, perhaps suggesting the possibility that our age as Elden Lord may in fact morph into the age of Bayle, just as he wanted long ago. Though I'd be curious to see how Bayle's heart fares up against a Tarnished already scorched by the Frenzied flame. Speaking of which, Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame, is easily the most missable legendary boss in the entire DLC. Found atop his accursed manse deep into the Abyssal Woods, which themselves can only be accessed via the Darklight Catacombs. Exiting here, we find immediately that the entire region is guarded by a Haunsent called Jory the Inquisitor, who wields a barbed staff spear. The tip bristles with golden barbs, symbolic of the Inquisition's torture. Now, bear this item in mind because something very similar is going to come up again soon. But heading into the woods, after about 5 seconds, Torrent will bolt, and a message will read, "The spectral steed is frightened and cannot be summoned," all whilst a terrifying soundscape begins to descend in this ominous place. And what could possibly make our horse, that's ridden through all manner of danger, scare off like this? Well, heading in further, written upon the ground are warnings from the game itself, saying, "Don't let it see you. Once you are seen, there is no escape. It cannot even be touched." This is of course in reference to the Winter Lantern enemies, which indeed cannot be hit unless we parry them first. Now, heading south, we'll at least be able to find in some church ruins the map for the area, which describes it as a thick forest, untouched even by sunlight, known as the Sanctum of Sage Midra, and is a region forbidden by the Haunsent. This would explain why Jory the Inquisitor was serving as a gatekeeper to the entire area. Whatever happened here, the Haunsent are desperate to stop it spreading. And it's pretty clear, after our encounters from the base game, that what happened in this region was the Frenzied Flame. That all-consuming, madness-inducing fire, which, according to the item Surging Frenzied Flame, has the power also to melt away spirits, destroying them despite the fact that they should be eternal. And seeing this terrible destruction, the Haunsent, much like the Golden Order, forbade the flame's use. And it also explains why Torrent is too terrified to be summoned here. As a spirit himself, this would be one of the few places capable of actually destroying him. It just sucks for us because we now have to walk everywhere, as though this region wasn't already scary enough. But that's enough on the region, so let's take a look at Midra's manse, as this place will explain just how the Abyssal Woods came to be as they are. And as we enter this place, we're greeted immediately with a warning.
Leave. Now. Come no closer. No closer, I say. The madness wells.
This is the voice of Midra, begging us to stay away, and should we choose to ignore his warning, speaking instead to a spirit ahead, it will only reiterate more of the same. I welcome you, O uninvited guest, but I must warn, as you venture in, heed the words of our great master, Midra. Approach not the madness, lest ye succumb. Indeed, even the way further inside has been hidden from view, disguised behind a painting clearly depicting Midra's manse in an age far less bereft of light. A stately home surrounded by flowers, comparable only now to Marika's shaman village in the hinterlands. But all of this would of course become consumed by the frenzied flame, turning into the hellscape of today. Beyond the painting, we'll face off against several spectral Hornsent soldiers, including the elite bird warriors, further confirming that Midra's manse before this catastrophe was another settlement of the Hornsent. And now perhaps these spirits patrol the place in order to keep Midra in check. But who was Midra? Well, the Mad Craftsman's Cookbook confirms that not only was he master of this manse, but that he ruled it alongside his lady of the manse, Nanaya, who is just as important to this story as Midra himself. Ascending to the upper levels of the manse, we'll then meet another spirit, who, please, I beg you, stop. Haven't I taken enough? Are we not brethren, common in our line, and yet you offer only cruelty? I ask, what great crime did Midra commit? It appears that after Midra inherited the frenzied flame, the Hornsent laid waste to his manse, destroying those that dwelt within and suppressing Midra, all in an attempt to contain the all-consuming wrath of the frenzied flame. The swollen grape item found around the manse confirms that Midra inherited the frenzied flame much in the same way we can, having been touched directly by the Three Fingers embrace. Though the Hornsent would not permit that, and leading their own assault on Midra's manse, beat back the growing fury of the flames. And for Midra himself, they inflicted upon him the eternal agony of golden barbs, piercing through his body to suppress the frenzied flame. Midra cannot become lord of the frenzied flame in this state, but he's also forbidden from dying. And given how desperately Midra warns us away upon our entry to the manor, as well as this line when we eventually do reach him,
The depths of your foolishness!
I think that this eternal suffering was accepted willingly on Midra's part. Perhaps he only realized after accepting it the all-consuming nature of the frenzied flame, and subsequently allowed the Hornsent to then pierce his body with suppressing barbs. But why then did Midra venture to become Lord of the Frenzied Flame in the first place? As a wise sage, you'd think he'd know better. Was he enticed by a manipulative figure like Shabriri? Well, perhaps, but I don't think that it was Shabriri himself. Heading to the upper region of Midra's library, we can find the body of Nanaya, clutching in her hand the item Nanaya's torch. It reads that in a distant land, in an age long past, was born a man who failed to become the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. All that remains of him is cradled gently by Nanaya, the lady of the manse, companion to Midra, lover, or perhaps finger maiden? Well, Midra's remembrance would suggest the latter, telling us that as the golden barbs inflicted agony upon him, Midra held fast to Nanaya's entreaty, endure. The word was a curse. Now, why would a lover tell Midra to endure this for millennia? Granted, death may not have been an alternative on the table, so that might be it, though a three-finger maiden would have a very good reason too. You see, in suffering through such torments, enduring it for so long, Midra will eventually break, much like Kale's merchant caravan, who were imprisoned beneath the capital. The victim, after suffering for so long, finally resorts to say, screw it. May chaos take the world. And as Midra's Flame of Frenzy states, the Lord of Frenzied Flame shall take their torment, despair, their affliction, every sin, every curse, all melted away. Yet Midra, like others before him, was too weak to become a lord. And yes, in the end, his weakness was proven, but that's because of the supreme power of this Tarnished. And for a moment back there, Midra had decided to give in to the Frenzied Flame, and had he emerged the victor from our fight, I think he'd finally have triumphed over that weakness, and perhaps would then have taken up the mantle of the Lord of Frenzied Flame, using the power of the Outer God of Chaos to wash away everything of the old world. And why else would Nanaya cradle his remains using a torch fashioned from a dying Frenzied Flame if she wasn't an agent of said flame? Another point may be for you guys to discuss in the comments. Overall, the Midra fight is both fast-paced and explosive, requiring plenty of focus. I mean, literally, the madness-quelling stat to emerge the victor, ridding the world of this prospective lord for one of its greatest scourges, after having initially briefly unleashed it, admittedly. Or, if we ourselves seek to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, then we just took out the competition. You know, for a while I didn't think I'd actually be able to manage this one, and that's because promised Consort Radahn, or more so Radahn Consort of Miquella, is just so damn tough. You'll definitely want to head into this fight with Miquella's Great Rune, which we obtained from the Scadutree Avatar earlier, as well as the Golden Braid, for negating holy damage found in a tree at the Shaman village. But some of you may be wondering just how exactly we've come to be fighting Radahn again, whom we already killed back at the festival in Caelid. And our answer lies in the questline of Arnsbach.
After Lord Moke's slaying at his dynastic palace, it appears his body has been absconded with and taken straight to kind Miquella. What could they possibly have in mind for Lord Moke's remains? The implications are rather unnerving.
To understand what Miquella plans to do with Moke's body, we have to uncover the Secret Rite scroll, also found here in the storehouse. This describes the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, saying a lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. So Miquella, on his journey to godhood, was forced to cast off everything, as we've learned already from his crosses and the description of his Great Rune. But now, stripped of physicality, Miquella, just like the other gods, will require a lord to enforce his will in the lands between. The soul of somebody with great strength who can be challenged by no other. Returning the scroll to Arnsbach, he'll confirm that the body of his former lord Moog is to become this vessel. We all know at this point just whom the vessel will house, but continuing the quest and delivering Arnsbach's letter to Freya, we can receive this information ahead of time.
As the Festival of War concluded, General Radahn's soul met an honourable end, but kindly Miquella wishes to revive it.
So, as it turns out, we are largely responsible, and have enabled Miquella's plan to become a god twice over. Firstly, we finally gave Radahn an honourable defeat at the festival, allowing his soul to leave his body and drift, just as everything ultimately does, into the Shadow Realm. Then, we defeated Lord Moog, allowing his body to serve as an empty vessel for Radahn's soul. It may be a kick in the teeth to learn that this boss you're stuck on, you've already actually defeated. Twice over. Moog, of course, was the one to kidnap Miquella in his cocoon from the Erdtree and bring him to the Mohgwyn Palace. And for a long time before the DLC, everybody assumed that Moog did this of his own entire free will, hoping to raise kindly Miquella to full godhood, becoming his consort, and kickstarting his own dynasty, which would serve another outer god. Not the greater will, but the Formless Mother, who said to bestow power on accursed blood. A blood god of sorts, I suppose. Though, as it turns out, Moog was merely a pawn in Miquella's plan, a vessel to ultimately house Miquella's actual promised consort. So why exactly did Miquella want Radahn? Well, according to the remembrance of a lord and a god, in their childhood, Miquella saw Radahn as a lord, his strength and his kindness that stood in stark contrast with their afflicted selves. And so, Miquella made his heartfelt wish that Radahn would one day be his king consort. And we can see this exact moment through a dream relived after defeating the pair.
Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our
part of the vow. Promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place.
An important thing to note with this, though, is that we never hear Radahn's reply. In fact, we never hear Radahn speak a single damn line throughout this fight or the game, making it tough to gauge his take on all of this. Though I'm willing to wager that Radahn did not promise this. Or if he did, he later changed his mind and wanted desperately to avoid becoming Miquella's consort, perhaps after learning the true nature of the Age of Compassion that Miquella sought to usher in. You see, Miquella has the ability to charm people, to steal their hearts and force them into loving him. We can see this at the start of the DLC, when all the NPC characters are working in service to Miquella, right up to the point where his great rune is broken, the charm is dispelled, and everybody reverts to working in their own self-interest. We can experience this charm again firsthand during the boss fight, where, if grabbed twice by this move, we'll have our heart stolen by Miquella, joining his 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion, but distinctively not of our own free will. Though it's something I'd recommend doing once in the fight, mind you, to obtain a unique gesture. But after that, simply disarm it with Miquella's rune. And this heart-stealing charm of Miquella is presumably what he seeks to enact at far greater scale across the lands between, literally forcing everybody to love him and to do whatever he bids. So whilst a compassionate age doesn't sound too bad from the outset, when it's also entirely bereft of free will, is it really an age anybody would want to be a part of, when love is used as a weapon to enforce order? But back to Radahn himself, and the evidence that he did not want to become Miquella's promised consort can be seen by the fact that Malenia, Miquella's sister, went to war against Radahn. This was seemingly the first attempt to kill Radahn, which would have sent his soul to the Shadow Realm for the next stage of Miquella's plan. But the battle ultimately ended with no victor. To avoid defeat, Malenia unleashed the Rotflower Blossom across Ionia, turning it into the Scarlet Rot Swamp that we know today. It's the same sort of move that she pulls in our fight with her. And now, we know from the Young Lion armor set that as she did this to Radahn, she whispered in his ear, saying, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." Again, this didn't kill Radahn, but merely destroyed his mind, leaving him to roam the wastes of Caelid until we finally defeat him. Right up to the end, Radahn fought against death. He fought to avoid becoming the promised consort. And maybe that's why Radahn says nothing in the final boss fight. It may be the case that at this point, only the strong warrior part remains. If Miquella had had his way, Radahn would merely have been the enforcer, with Miquella making all the decisions from atop his shoulders. We learned from Ymir in the Meta chapter that Miquella knew his bloodline was tainted, that the Golden Order was built on lies. He of course first grew the secret Erdtree to serve as a refuge for those shunned by the Order, but it seems now, from his conversation with Radahn, that his ultimate plan was always to become a god and do away with the old order. And regardless of whether you think Miquella's plan is evil or actually the best solution in a broken world, Miquella still stands in direct opposition to our Tarnished's own ambitions, which is why we'll time and again keep passing through this fog wall until finally this rival god and lord lie defeated. Miquella sought to accept all that was and would be, but found one that refused to be embraced. No wonder, as one god and one king consort is all the world needs. And there we have explanations for every major boss in Shadow of the Erdtree. I did not realize how long this video would turn out to be when I started it, and you know, I think there's probably, definitely more, even now, that could be explored regarding each of these bosses. But next time, I think I'll return to less well-known bosses or characters. So subscribe for more Elden Ring lore and secrets in the coming months. Huge thank you, as always, to the patrons for your continued support, especially for huge videos like this, which take a crazy amount of time to research and create. And if you want to support more of this content, then consider pledging from £1 a month for early access to content, your name in each video like these awesome people, special ranks in the Discord server, and the option to cancel again at any time. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a fair bit. I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you in the next one.